The thunder of hooves pounding against the hard-packed earth announced Elias Wyatt's return to Cottonwood Springs, but it was the distant wail of a child that changed the course of his solitary life forever. The year was 1879, and the West was still wild, untamed, and unforgiving. Elias had been riding for 3 days straight, making his way back to the ranch. He'd been working for the past 2 years after delivering a herd to the railroad station in Santa Fe. Exhausted and eager for the comfort of his bunk, Elias guided his horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding named Buck, toward the stable. The setting sun cast long shadows across the dusty yard, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. As he approached the weathered building, the crying grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't the sound of a single child, but two. Elias dismounted, his boots landing heavily on the ground. His spurs jingled as he cautiously approached the stable door, one hand resting on the worn handle of his Colt revolver. In his 12 years as a cowboy, he'd learned that unexpected sounds often meant trouble. The heavy wooden door creaked as he pushed it open. The interior was dim, lit only by thin shafts of fading sunlight filtering through cracks in the walls. The smell of hay, horse, and leather filled his nostrils, familiar scents that usually brought comfort after long days on the trail, but today they were underscored by something else. Fear. Desperation. "Hello," Elias called out, his deep voice resonating through the stable. The crying momentarily stopped, replaced by hushed whispers and rustling hay. Elias moved forward slowly, following the sounds to the last stall. What he found there stopped him in his tracks. 2 children, a boy no more than 6 and a girl perhaps 4, huddled protectively around a woman lying in the hay. The woman was pale, her dress torn and dirty, her dark hair tangled around her face. Beside her sat a small bundle of belongings wrapped in a faded quilt. The children looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. The boy positioned himself in front of his sister and mother, a broken piece of wood clutched in his small hand. "Stay back," the boy warned, his voice trembling despite his brave stance. Elias raised his hands slowly. "I mean no harm," he said gently, dropping to one knee to appear less threatening. His tall frame and weather-beaten face often intimidated folks who didn't know him. "This is the Triple R Ranch. I work here. Can I help you?" The woman stirred, her eyes fluttering open. They were striking deep blue like the sky after a storm. She struggled to sit up. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "My children, we need shelter just for tonight." Elias noticed the bruises on her wrists and the cut on her cheek. Someone had hurt this woman, and recently. His jaw tightened. "What's your name, madam?" he asked, keeping his voice soft. She hesitated before answering. Violet Dawson. These are my children, Samuel and Emma." The little girl Emma peeked out from behind her brother, thumb tucked firmly in her mouth. Her golden curls were the same shade as her mother's, visible now that Elias's eyes had adjusted to the dim light. "I'm Elias Wyatt," he replied. "How long have you been here?" "Since midday," Violet answered, wincing as she shifted position. We had nowhere else to go." Elias nodded slowly, taking in their bedraggled appearance. They clearly needed help, food, medical attention, and a proper place to rest. "Are you running from someone, Mrs. Dawson?" he asked directly, knowing that in situations like these, honesty was crucial. Her eyes darted to her children before she gave a barely perceptible nod. "My husband," she whispered. "Ex-husband now. He found us in Silver Creek. We had to leave quickly." Elias understood immediately. Domestic troubles weren't uncommon, and the law often did little to protect women and children. The bruises told him all he needed to know about what kind of man her husband was. "Can you walk?" he asked, already formulating a plan. Violet nodded, though uncertainty flickered across her face. She attempted to stand but swayed dangerously. Elias moved forward, offering his arm for support. After a moment's hesitation, she took it, her touch light as a feather. "Samuel, Emma," Elias said gently to the children, "your mama needs help. I'm going to take you all to the main house. There's food there and warm beds." Samuel lowered his makeshift weapon but remained wary. "Are you the boss here?" Despite everything, Elias smiled. No, son. Mr. Richardson is the owner, but he's a good man. He won't turn away folks in need, especially children. Emma stepped forward then, her small face serious. Do you have cookies? She asked, her voice barely audible. The unexpected question broke the tension. Elias chuckled softly. I believe Mrs. Henderson, our cook, might have some hidden away. She's got a soft spot for little ones with a sweet tooth. That seemed to settle matters for Emma, who nodded solemnly. Violet gathered her strength and, with Elias's support, stood fully. He noticed she favored her right leg and moved carefully. The children collected their small bundle of belongings. Thank you, Violet said quietly. We won't be a burden. I can work cooking, cleaning, sewing, whatever's needed. Let's worry about getting you all fed and rested first, Elias replied. Then we'll figure out the rest. As they stepped out of the stable into the cooling evening air, Violet hesitated. Elias followed her gaze to the distant horizon, understanding her fear. Whoever she was running from, she expected him to follow. You're safe here, Elias said, the words emerging as both a reassurance and a promise. He offered his hand, not his arm this time, but his hand. It was a simple gesture, but weighted with meaning. We'll make sure of it. Violet looked at his outstretched hand, calloused and strong from years of rope work and riding, then back to his face. Something passed between them in that moment, a silent understanding. She placed her hand in his. I promise you a home, Elias said quietly, so only she could hear, for you and your children, whatever it takes. The sincerity in his voice must have convinced her, because she nodded, a tentative smile touching her lips for the first time. With the children following close behind, they made their way toward the welcoming lights of the main house. The Richardson ranch house was modest by wealthy standards but substantial for the territory, a two-story structure built of solid pine with a wide porch wrapping around three sides. Light spilled from the windows, and smoke curled from the stone chimney, promising warmth within. Mrs. Henderson, a stout woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair and kind eyes, met them at the door. Her eyebrows shot up at the sight of Violet and the children, but to her credit, she asked no questions. Instead, she ushered them inside to the kitchen, clucking disapprovingly at their thin frames. Sit, sit, she insisted, already pulling bowls from the cupboard. Stew's still hot and there's fresh bread too. While Mrs. Henderson fed the hungry family, Elias sought out Thomas Richardson. He found the ranch owner in his study, reviewing ledgers by lamplight. At 55, Richardson was still robust, though his once brown hair had silvered entirely. He looked up as Elias entered. Back from Santa Fe already, Wyatt. Didn't expect you until tomorrow. Pushed hard the last day, sir, Elias replied, removing his hat. There's something you should know. I found a woman and two young children hiding in the stable. Richardson set down his pen. Oh, Elias explained the situation succinctly, including his suspicions about Violet's abusive husband. Richardson listened without interruption, his expression growing grave. And you've brought them to the house? He asked when Elias finished. Yes, sir, they needed immediate help. Mrs. Henderson's feeding them now. Richardson nodded thoughtfully. You did right, Wyatt. We can't turn away a woman and children in need. He stood, straightening his vest. Let's go meet these folks. In the kitchen, the transformation was already visible. With food in their bellies and the warmth of the stove nearby, Samuel and Emma's faces had brightened considerably. Even Violet seemed less fraught, though wariness still lingered in her eyes. Richardson introduced himself with gentle courtesy. Mrs. Dawson, you and your children are welcome here. We have a spare room upstairs where you can rest tonight, and tomorrow we can discuss more permanent arrangements. Relief washed over Violet's face. Mr. Richardson, I don't know how to thank you. We can earn our keep, I promise. I've no doubt of that, Richardson replied kindly, but tonight rest is what you need most. After the children had been fed, bathed, and settled into borrowed nightclothes, Emma in one of Mrs. Henderson's grandchild's nightgowns and Samuel in a shirt of Richardson's that hung to his knees. Elias found himself alone with Violet in the kitchen. Mrs. Henderson had gone to prepare the spare room, and Richardson had returned to his study. Violet sat at the table, a cup of tea warming her hands. In the lamplight, with her damp hair combed and her face clean, she looked younger than Elias had initially thought, perhaps 26 or 27 to his 32 years. "Your children are resilient," Elias remarked, taking a seat across from her. A small smile touched her lips. "They've had to be." She hesitated, then added, "Samuel hasn't spoken more than he did today in months. He used to be so talkative." "He's protecting you," Elias observed. "Taking on a man's responsibilities." "He shouldn't have to," Violet whispered, tears suddenly brimming in her eyes. "They've seen too much, Elias, things no child should witness." It was the first time she'd used his given name, and something shifted between them, a subtle acknowledgement of trust beginning to form. "May I ask what happened?" he inquired gently. "You don't have to tell me, but it might help if we know what or who we're dealing with." Violet took a deep breath, then slowly rolled up her sleeve, revealing more bruises and what looked like a burn mark. Elias's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, waiting for her to speak. "I married Gerald Dawson when I was 18, she began, her voice steady despite the pain evident in her eyes. "He was charming at first, handsome, well-spoken, from a good family in Denver. It changed after we were wed, slowly at first. Criticisms, controlling who I could speak to, what I could wear, then came the first strike." She traced the rim of her teacup with one finger. "I should have left then, but I was young and scared and ashamed. By the time Samuel was born, it was much worse. We moved frequently, Gerald, always finding reasons why we needed to start fresh somewhere new. It was really because people would begin to notice, to ask questions." "And the law?" Elias asked, though he already knew the answer. Violet gave a bitter laugh. "The law." "The sheriff in Silver Creek was Gerald's drinking companion. When I finally gathered the courage to run 2 years ago, Gerald had me declared mentally unfit. Said I was a danger to myself and the children. He almost had me committed to an asylum." Elias felt cold fury building inside him. Such stories weren't uncommon, but they never failed to stir his anger. "How did you get away?" "A kind doctor," Violet explained. "He knew Gerald was lying. He helped me take the children and flee in the night. We've been moving ever since, staying nowhere more than a few months. I found work sewing, cooking, whatever I could. We were in Silver Creek for almost 6 months, the longest we'd stayed anywhere. I thought maybe we'd finally lost him." "But he found you," Elias concluded. Violet nodded. 3 days ago. I came home from work and saw his horse outside our rented room. We ran with only what we could carry." Her voice broke. "He'll keep looking, he always does, says no one takes what belongs to him." "You don't belong to anyone," Elias said firmly. "Neither do your children." Violet looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "Gerald Dawson is a dangerous man, Mr. Wyatt. I don't want to bring trouble to people who have shown us kindness." "Trouble finds its way to most doors eventually," Elias replied. "Better to face it together than alone." Before Violet could respond, Mrs. Henderson returned, announcing that the room was ready. As Violet stood to follow her upstairs, she paused beside Elias's chair. "Thank you," she said softly, "for finding us today." Elias nodded. "Get some rest, Mrs. Dawson. Tomorrow will be better." After they left, Elias remained at the kitchen table, turning his coffee cup between his hands. The ranch was secluded enough, a good 20 miles from the nearest town of any size. It would take time for someone unfamiliar with the territory to find it, but Elias harbored no illusions. If Gerald Dawson was as determined as Violet suggested, he would eventually track them here. The next morning dawned clear and crisp. Elias, who had slept in the bunkhouse with the other hands, woke early and headed to the main house. He found Samuel already awake, sitting on the porch steps, watching the cowboys prepare for the day's work. "Morning, Samuel," Elias greeted, sitting beside the boy. "Sleep well," Samuel nodded, his eyes fixed on the corral where one of the hands was breaking a new horse. "You like horses?" Elias asked. "Yes, sir," Samuel replied, more forthcoming than the previous day. "We had a neighbor once with a brown horse. He let me feed it apples. Would you like to meet Buck? That's my horse over there." Elias pointed to the chestnut gelding grazing near the fence. Samuel's eyes widened. "Can I, after breakfast?" Elias promised. "If your mama says it's all right." They found Violet in the kitchen with Emma, helping Mrs. Henderson prepare breakfast. The night's rest had brought more color to her cheeks, though she still moved carefully, mindful of her injuries. "Good morning," she greeted them, her smile tentative but genuine. For the first time, Elias noticed a dimple in her right cheek when she smiled. It was a charming detail that softened her otherwise guarded expression. Over breakfast, Richardson outlined his proposal. "Mrs. Dawson, we're in need of someone to help Mrs. Henderson with the cooking and household tasks. The position includes room and board for you and your children. Would that arrangement interest you?" Violet's fork paused midway to her mouth. "You're offering me employment, a permanent position." "Indeed," Richardson confirmed. "Mrs. Henderson isn't getting any younger, her words, not mine, and she's been asking for help these past 6 months. The timing seems providential." Violet glanced at Mrs. Henderson, who nodded encouragingly. "It would be a blessing to have another woman about the place," the older woman said, "and those little ones would brighten up this old house." Tears glistened in Violet's eyes. "Mr. Richardson, yes, thank you, I accept gratefully." "Excellent," Richardson said, clearly pleased. "There's a small cabin about 100 yards behind the main house. It needs some work, but it could be your own home once it's repaired. Until then, you're welcome to stay in the spare room." "A cabin, our own place." Violet's voice wavered with emotion. "That's more than I dared hope for." After breakfast, true to his word, Elias took Samuel to meet Buck. The boy's face lit up as he stroked the horse's velvety nose and offered him an apple Mrs. Henderson had provided. Even Emma, initially shy around the large animal, eventually giggled with delight when Buck gently nuzzled her hair. Watching Violet with her children, their faces alight with simple joy, Elias felt something shift within him. For 12 years, he'd been a drifter, never staying in one place long enough to form attachments. The cowboy life suited him, or so he'd believed. Now, observing this small family, he wondered if perhaps he'd been running too, in his own way. The next few days established a rhythm. Violet worked alongside Mrs. Henderson, quickly proving her worth in the kitchen and with household tasks. Her needle skills were exceptional, and soon she was repairing clothing for the ranch hands, who paid her small sums for her work. The children adapted quickly to ranch life, Samuel shadowing Elias whenever possible, learning about horses and cattle, while Emma became Mrs. Henderson's little helper, serious about her task of setting the table for meals. Elias, meanwhile, divided his time between ranch duties and repairing the cabin. Other hands joined the effort during their free hours, and within a week, the small structure was transformed. New roof shingles replaced the leaking ones, windows were reglazed, walls patched and whitewashed, and a small garden plot cleared beside the front door. The day the cabin was ready, Elias led Violet, blindfolded, from the main house to see the finished result. Samuel and Emma ran ahead, already aware of the surprise. "Just a few more steps," Elias guided her, his hand steady at her elbow. "Now you can look." Violet removed the blindfold and gasped. The once dilapidated cabin now stood sturdy and welcoming. Curtains made from fabric Mrs. Henderson had found adorned the windows, and a wreath of wildflowers hung on the freshly painted door. Samuel and Emma stood on the small porch, beaming with pride at their new home. "Oh, Elias," Violet breathed, tears flowing freely. "It's perfect." Inside, the transformation was even more remarkable. The single room had been divided with a curtain to create a sleeping area for the children. A small wood stove stood in one corner, and a table with 4 chairs occupied the center of the main space. Richardson had contributed a rocking chair, and Mrs. Henderson had provided quilts for the beds. The men all pitched in, Elias explained, suddenly shy about his role in the project. They wanted to help. "And who organized them?" Violet asked, her perceptive gaze meeting his. "Who spent every free moment here this past week?" Elias shrugged, uncomfortable with the acknowledgement. "It was nothing. It's everything," Violet corrected softly. She reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you, Elias, for all of this." That evening, after the children were asleep in their new beds, Violet and Elias sat on the porch steps of the cabin, watching the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. The night was peaceful, broken only by the occasional lowing of cattle in the distant pastures and the chirping of crickets in the grass. "I never thought I'd feel safe again," Violet admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "To have a home, a real home. You deserve it," Elias said simply. "You and the children." Violet turned to look at him, her face silvered by moonlight. "Why are you doing all this, Elias? You barely know us." It was a fair question, one Elias had asked himself multiple times over the past week. "I suppose I know what it's like to be running from something," he finally answered. "To need someone to offer a hand instead of turning away." He didn't elaborate, and Violet didn't press. Instead, she nodded, understanding in her eyes. They sat in comfortable silence, the space between them charged with unspoken feelings that neither was ready to acknowledge. Life settled into a pleasant routine over the next few weeks. June gave way to July, bringing longer, hotter days. The ranch bustled with activity as haying season began. Violet proved invaluable, not only in the kitchen but in managing the household accounts, which she handled with unexpected skill. Richardson, impressed by her abilities, eventually trusted her with more responsibilities, including correspondence with suppliers. The children thrived. Samuel, no longer the solemn, frightened boy from the stable, eagerly absorbed everything Elias taught him about ranch life. Emma, too, blossomed, her laughter a common sound around the property. She developed a particular fondness for a calico kitten from the barn litter, which Elias presented to her one evening. The child had named it Butterscotch and treated the kitten like a treasured doll. Elias found himself spending most of his free time with Violet and the children. They would take picnics by the creek on Sundays after church, or he would sit with them in the evenings, reading stories to the children before bedtime. It was a domesticity he had never experienced, having left home at 16 after his parents died, and he found himself craving it more with each passing day. Violet, too, was changing. The perpetual worry that had lined her face when they first met gradually eased. She smiled more readily, laughed more freely. The bruises faded, and with them, some of her wariness. She began to hold herself differently, not like someone prepared to flee at any moment, but like a woman who belonged. It was during the Independence Day celebration that something shifted between them. Richardson hosted a gathering for all the ranch hands and their families. Tables were set up in the yard, laden with food. After dark, some of the younger men set off fireworks purchased from a traveling salesman. As colorful explosions lit up the night sky, Elias stood beside Violet, watching the children's faces aglow with wonder. Without planning to, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers intertwined with his, warm and sure. Later, walking back to her cabin, the children running ahead, Elias gathered his courage. "Violet, I need to tell you something." She looked up at him, moonlight catching in her hair. "What is it?" "I think I'm falling in love with you," he said simply. "I know it might be too soon, and you have every reason to be cautious," but she stopped him by placing her finger gently against his lips. "It's not too soon," she whispered. "Not for what I feel." Elias's heart thundered in his chest. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was tender, hesitant at first, then deepening as she responded. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I never thought I could trust a man again," Violet admitted, her forehead resting against his. "You've shown me I was wrong." That night marked a beginning. They proceeded carefully, mindful of the children and of Violet's past. Elias courted her properly, bringing wildflowers, taking her for walks in the evenings after the children were asleep, sharing stories of their lives. He told her about growing up in Missouri, losing his parents to influenza, making his way west to find work. She shared more about her childhood in Colorado, her dreams before Gerald had crushed them, her hopes for Samuel and Emma's future. It was during one such evening, nearly 2 months after their arrival at the ranch, that the peace they had built was shattered. They were returning from a walk when Elias noticed a horse tied to the porch railing of the main house, an unfamiliar bay stallion with a Denver saddle. Violet froze, her hand tightening painfully around Elias's. "That's Gerald's horse," she whispered, terror evident in every line of her body. He's found us. Elias's first instinct was to rush her back to the cabin to hide her and the children, but he knew it was already too late. If Gerald was here, he would have already spoken to someone, already learned of Violet's presence. The children, Violet gasped, breaking into a run toward the cabin. They found Samuel and Emma safe inside, being watched over by Mrs. Henderson, who had been teaching Emma to knit. The older woman took one look at their faces and understood something was wrong. "Stay here," Elias instructed, his voice low and urgent. "Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me or Mr. Richardson." "Elias, no," Violet pleaded, clutching his arm. "You don't know what he's capable of." "I have a fair idea," Elias replied grimly. "But this ends tonight, Violet, one way or another." Before she could protest further, he was gone, striding purposefully toward the main house. Inside, he found Richardson in the study with a well-dressed man. Tall and handsome in a conventional way, Gerald Dawson exuded an air of entitlement that set Elias's teeth on edge immediately. "Ah, Wyatt," Richardson greeted him, looking relieved to see him. "This gentleman is asking about a Mrs. Dawson and her children. Says she's his wife." "Ex-wife," Elias corrected firmly, keeping his gaze fixed on Gerald. "And yes, Mrs. Dawson and her children are residing on this ranch. They're under the protection of everyone here." Gerald's handsome features arranged themselves into an expression of concern. "There seems to be a misunderstanding. Violet is still very much my wife. I have the marriage certificate to prove it." He reached into his jacket, producing a folded document. "She's been unwell, mentally unstable. The children aren't safe with her." "That's a lie," Elias stated flatly. Gerald's facade of concern hardened slightly. "And who exactly are you to make such a claim, Cowboy?" "Someone who's seen the bruises you left on her," Elias replied evenly. "Someone who's watched her children flinch at sudden movements because of what they witnessed you do to their mother." Richardson stood, his expression grave. "Mr. Dawson, these are serious matters." "Serious indeed," Gerald agreed, his tone still controlled but with an edge of menace creeping in. "Serious enough that I've already spoken with the sheriff in town. He's provided me with papers to reclaim my wife and children. If necessary, he'll ride out here himself tomorrow." Elias felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. The law typically sided with husbands in such matters, especially well-connected ones like Gerald appeared to be. "I suggest you leave, Mr. Dawson," Elias said quietly. "Now, while you still can." Gerald smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Are you threatening me, Cowboy? Because I assure you that would be unwise." The tension in the room was palpable. Richardson, sensing the volatile situation, intervened. "Gentlemen, it's late. Mr. Dawson, we can continue this discussion tomorrow. I'm sure you can find accommodations in town." Gerald considered for a moment, then nodded. "Very well, but understand this: I will be returning with the sheriff. Violet and my children will be leaving with me one way or another." As he turned to leave, he added, "And Cowboy, stay away from my wife. She's not for the likes of you." Elias remained rooted to the spot, his fists clenched at his sides, fighting the urge to strike the man. Only Richardson's warning hand on his arm kept him in check. After Gerald left, Richardson sighed heavily. "This is a complicated situation, Wyatt." "It's not complicated, sir," Elias disagreed. "That man is abusive. Violet and those children need protection." "The law may not see it that way," Richardson pointed out. "A husband has rights over his wife and children, regardless of his behavior behind closed doors." Elias knew he was right, and the knowledge burned inside him. "Then what do we do?" Richardson thought for a moment. "We need time." "And leverage." He moved to his desk, pulling out paper and pen. "I have a friend in Cheyenne, a judge who might be willing to help, but we need to get Violet and the children there first." "You're suggesting they run again," Elias said, his heart sinking. "No," Richardson corrected. "I'm suggesting we fight this properly through legal channels. But to do that, we need Violet safe and beyond Gerald's immediate reach." The plan came together quickly. Elias would escort Violet and the children to Cheyenne that very night, traveling cross-country rather than by the main roads where they might be intercepted. Richardson would write to his friend, explaining the situation. and would follow in a few days' time with documentation attesting to Violet's character and stability. When Elias returned to the cabin and explained what had happened, Violet's face went ashen. "I knew this day would come," she whispered. "I just hoped." "We're not giving up," Elias assured her firmly, "but we need to leave tonight. Pack only what's necessary." As Violet gathered their belongings, Elias knelt before Samuel and Emma. "We're going on an adventure," he explained, keeping his voice cheerful despite the gravity of the situation. "Like explorers, but we need to be very quiet like Indians tracking deer. Can you do that?" Both children nodded solemnly, sensing the importance of his words even if they didn't fully understand the danger. Within an hour, they were ready. Richardson provided them with his personal buggy rather than a wagon. It would be faster and less conspicuous. Elias loaded their few possessions, along with provisions Mrs. Henderson had hastily prepared. Buck would be tethered behind, providing Elias with a means to scout ahead if necessary. As they prepared to depart, Violet stood for a moment, gazing at the cabin that had been their home for such a short time. Tears streamed silently down her face. "We'll be back," Elias promised, taking her hand. "This isn't goodbye, Violet, it's just a temporary departure." She looked up at him, searching his face. "Do you truly believe that?" "With all my heart," he answered, and meant it. They traveled through the night, keeping off the main trails, guided by starlight and Elias's knowledge of the territory. The children slept in the back of the buggy, wrapped in blankets, while Violet kept watch beside Elias on the driver's seat. "I'm sorry," she said after they had been traveling for several hours. "Sorry for bringing this trouble to you and the Richardsons." Elias shook his head. "Don't apologize for seeking safety, Violet. None of this is your fault." "But it affects you now," she insisted. "Your life was peaceful before we arrived." Elias guided the horses around a rocky outcropping before responding. "My life was empty before you arrived," he corrected softly. "I just didn't realize how empty until I met you and the children." In the pale light of early dawn, he could see her eyes fill with tears. "I love you, Elias," she whispered. "I shouldn't say it not now, not with everything so uncertain, but I do." "I love you too," he replied, the words feeling right, necessary. "And when this is over, I want to marry you, Violet, be a father to Samuel and Emma, build a life together." She leaned against his shoulder, her quiet tears dampening his shirt. Not tears of despair this time, but of hope, fragile but real. They reached Cheyenne late the following day, exhausted but safe. Richardson's friend, Judge Edward Conway, welcomed them into his spacious home, his wife fussing over the children and insisting Violet rest immediately. The next week passed in a blur of legal consultations and testimonies. Judge Conway, outraged by Gerald's abuse and manipulation, took personal interest in the case. Telegrams flew between Cheyenne and the Triple R Ranch, where Richardson was gathering statements from ranch hands who had witnessed Violet's injuries upon arrival. Most crucial was the testimony of Dr. Martin, the physician who had helped Violet escape 2 years earlier. Located through Judge Conway's connections, the doctor provided a sworn statement detailing Violet's injuries and his professional opinion that Gerald Dawson posed a significant danger to his ex-wife and children. On the 7th day, the news came. Judge Conway entered the sitting room where Elias and Violet waited anxiously. "It's done," he announced, his usually stern face breaking into a smile. "The divorce has been legally recognized, with full custody of the children awarded to you, Mrs. Dawson. Furthermore, a restraining order has been issued against Gerald Dawson. He cannot come within 100 yards of you or the children." Violet swayed on her feet, overcome with emotion. Elias caught her, supporting her as the judge continued. "Mr. Dawson has been informed of these rulings. I'm told he departed for Denver this morning, though I would advise caution for some time. Men like him don't always accept defeat gracefully." "Thank you, Judge Conway," Violet managed through her tears. "How can we ever repay you?" "By living well," the judge replied simply. "That's repayment enough." 2 days later, they began the journey back to the Triple R Ranch. The return trip was markedly different from their flight. They traveled by day, taking their time, stopping to enjoy the beauty of the landscape. The children, relieved of the tension that had marked their departure, chattered excitedly about returning to their friends at the ranch. As the familiar buildings came into view on the horizon, Violet reached for Elias's hand. "I never thought I'd see this place again," she admitted. "Never thought I'd have a real home again." "Home isn't just a place," Elias replied, squeezing her hand. "It's the people you love." They were greeted with jubilation. Mrs. Henderson had prepared a feast, and the ranch hands had hung a banner across the porch. "Welcome home." Even Richardson's usual reserve cracked as he bent to hug Emma, who presented him with a drawing she had made during their absence. That evening, as the celebration wound down, Elias led Violet to a quiet spot beneath the old oak tree beside the main house. The setting sun cast long shadows across the property, reminiscent of that first evening when he had found her in the stable. "Violet Dawson," he said, taking both her hands in his. "I meant what I said on our journey. I love you and your children more than I thought possible. Will you marry me?" In answer, she rose on tiptoes and kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. When they parted, both were breathless. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "Yes, Elias Wyatt, I will marry you." They were wed 2 weeks later in the small church in town, with Richardson giving the bride away and Mrs. Henderson sniffling happily in the front pew. Samuel stood proudly beside Elias as his best man, while Emma scattered wildflower petals down the aisle. As autumn painted the Wyoming landscape in golds and russets, the Wyatt family settled comfortably into their cabin, now expanded with a second room built by Elias and the ranch hands. Violet's garden flourished, providing vegetables for their table and flowers for their windowsills. Samuel, now attending the small school in town, proudly told anyone who would listen that his pa was the best cowboy in Wyoming. Emma, growing more confident daily, had appointed herself caretaker of a growing menagerie of small animals, including Butterscotch the cat and a 3-legged dog Elias had rescued from a coyote trap. On a crisp October evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Violet rested her head against Elias's shoulder. "Do you remember what you promised me that first day?" she asked softly. "In the stable," Elias smiled, drawing her closer. "I promised you a home." "And you kept that promise," she murmured. "Not just shelter, but a real home with love and safety and happiness." From inside came the sound of Samuel reading a story to Emma, their voices rising and falling in the gathering dusk. Elias pressed a kiss to Violet's temple, his heart full to bursting. "Home is where you are," he said simply. "You and the children, that's all I need to be happy for the rest of my days." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Violet lifted her face for his kiss, secure in the knowledge that she was truly home at last.